Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So one of the most heavily debated teams of the last year and a half has been the Detroit Red Wings, more so Steve Yzerman in the overall Yzerplan, whether or not it's trending in the right direction, whether or not the Wings are going to make the playoffs next year, Raymond Sider, are they going to be future superstars? So today, I thought it would be a fun idea because I've talked about the Red Wings a lot and I'm a little bit lower on them than some other people. I thought it'd be fun to do one of these video essays, history recaps on the Yzerplan, run through everything that has happened, the good, the bad, and will it end up working? In April of 2019, franchise legend, Mount Rushmore player, longtime captain, three-time Stanley Cup champion, Steve Yzerman was hired by the Red Wings to be their general manager after 3 straight years of finishing below 80 points after prior to that making the playoffs for 25 straight seasons. When looking at Yzerman's tenure in Tampa Bay, the drafting was what made this team into the perennial contender that we saw from 2015 up until now. When looking at it in 2011, he of course got Kucherov 58th overall, arguably one of the best picks of the 21st century. Palat 208th in the same draft. Vasilevsky in 2012, 19th overall. 2014 picked up Braden Point 79th overall. 2015 Sorelli 72nd. Matthew Joseph 120th. And in 2016 selected Ross Colton 118th overall. And even his one whiff when he selected Jonathan Drouin 3rd overall, he made up for that when he traded Drouin for Sergachev. And Sergachev was a massive piece to those cup-winning teams. On top of that, he signed great extensions like Stamkos in 2016 at a reasonable 8 years, $8.5 million. Victor Hedman, 8 years, $7.75. He was a top 3 defenseman throughout most of that contract. On top of Kucherov, after a 100-point season, he gave him an 8-year, $9.5 million deal. That would kick in 2019 when he won the Hart, as well as Palat, 5 years, $5.25 million, and Alex Killorn, 7 years, $4.45. So his track record was amazing. So after a 128-point season where the Tampa Bay Lightning did get swept by the Columbus Blue Jackets, he decided that it was time to return home and rebuild his once great franchise. And again, although Ken Holland maybe fumbled some picks towards the end of his Detroit tenure, this was just the natural running of the course. This team, the Detroit Red Wings, were highly competitive for 25 goddamn years, and the only reason that they were able to extend kind of their dynasty was because they got Pavel Datsyuk in the 6th round and Henrik Zetterberg in the 7th. That just doesn't really happen nowadays with modern scouting. So when he took the job in 2019, the Red Wings were coming off a season when they only had 74 points, 4th worst in the entire NHL. And in terms of pieces, Dylan Larkin was looking like a legit future franchise center. He had 73 points, but outside of that, it was Athanasiou, who is 24 years old, just had 54 points. Anthony Mantha, 48 points at age 24. Bertuzzi, 47 at 23. Hronek was around half a point per game in 26 games, but there wasn't much outside of Larkin. That was not a core that was going to win shit. So as a result, he kind of had to nuke it. On top of that, during the 2019 deadline, they traded away Nick Jensen and Gustav Nyquist for picks and prospects. So he had some picks and prospects to work with heading into the 2019 draft. And let me just say this, one thing that really hurt Yzerman off the rip was even though they had high picks in 2016, 2017, and 2018, they absolutely botched those drafts before Yzerman got there. When looking at 2017, they took Rasmussen 9th overall, an okay player, not worth 9th overall. They took Gustav Lindstrom 38th overall. Jason Robertson was the next pick. And then in 2018, they selected Zadina 6th overall right before Quinn Hughes, as well as Veleno 30th, Berggren at 33rd. Not horrible value, but those guys aren't serious difference makers. Then to add insult to injury, after finishing as the 4th worst team in the entire NHL, they fell all the way to 6th in the draft lottery. That's going to be a common theme. But even though they were selecting 6th overall, they pretty easily got the 2nd best player within that top 6, arguably the 2nd best player in that entire draft. When looking at Moritz Seider, a little bit off the board pick. He was mocked around like 10th to 15th. But as we know, he had an amazing rookie year with 50 points and then back-to-back seasons of 42. Now, Seider does get deployed in one of the most difficult ways in the entire NHL. He always starts in his defensive zone. Lalonde is tough on him in terms of his minutes when looking at it. But this guy looks like at the bare minimum, he's going to be a good top pair defenseman. He just got paid like a legit number one, 7 years, $8.55 million. but we're still unclear whether or not he's going to develop into that legit top 20, top 15 true number one. But at 6th overall, without a doubt, Mort Seider, good value. He had 4 other picks in the top 66, though, and those kind of all went south. Up first at 35th overall, Antti Tuomisto went. He's a defenseman that played in the AHL last year. Nothing special. Robert Mastrumone, he never signed with the team and played last year with the Toronto Marlies. Had 15 points in 45 AHL games. Looks like it's not going to be anything. 60th overall, Albert Johansson. Same thing as Tuomisto. Was kind of meh for their AHL team last year. And then Albin Greer is in the 2nd tier of the Sweden League, so he kind of struck out on these picks in the 2nd round and the early 3rd. The rest of the draft wasn't that much better. He got Elmer Soderblom, who did start in the NHL for the 2022-2023 season, but last year in the AHL really wasn't anything special. Not sure he's going to get a chance in the NHL, at least with Detroit again. But again, at the end of the day, hitting your top 10 pick out of the park is perfectly fine. You're just starting your full rebuild. You're going to have other 2nd round picks that you're going to be able to kind of potentially hit on. They got Seider. That's a win. So heading into next season, the tank was fully on. They had 39 points in 71 games, good for 45-point pace across a full season. Obviously, COVID stopped that season, which was the worst in the entire NHL since the 2000 Thrashers, and they were by far the worst team in the NHL. In terms of Yzerman trades during that season, they shipped out Andreas Athanasiou for 2 2nd-round picks, which was fantastic value considering the fact that he did absolutely nothing in Edmonton and really just never found his footing again in the NHL. They kind of sold high on him, on top of taking Mark Stahl's $5.75 million cap hit for the Rangers and getting her 2nd-round pick for it. But despite finishing as the worst team in 20 years, they got hosed yet again in the draft lottery. Even worse, though, falling from 1st all the way to 4th. And if you remember, Alexis Lafreniere, he was viewed as a legit franchise superstar changer. However, they still had the 4th overall pick that had a lot of value, as well as 3 2nd-round picks, 2 3rd-round picks, and 2 4th-round picks. It was time for Yzerman to start finding sleepers like he did in Tampa. Like with 2019 and Moritz Seider, they yet again got a very good player with their 1st pick, selecting Lucas Raymond, who was great in his rookie year with 57 points, then had a bit of a sophomore slump, which we're going to get to, but last year really got back on track with 31 goals, 41 assists for 72 points, and now you got him locked up 8 years, $8.07 million. However, yet again, despite having all those 2nd and 3rd round picks, it doesn't really go according to plan. William Wallander at 32nd overall was looking like he was progressing very well after a solid 2022 SHL season, but this year in the AHL, his value did dip a little bit. 51st overall, Theo Niederbach is a center who only had 13 points in 47 SHL games last season. Cross Hannes looked like he could maybe be something after being around half a point per game in the AHL in 2023, but that production severely dipped this season. In the 3rd round, he selected Donovan Serbrango, who we're going to get to in a different trade later down the line, as well as Emil Viro, who didn't turn into anything, as well as Sam Stange and Jan Bednar being kind of nothing burgers in the 4th round. So Yzerman's draft is in the books, and when looking at it, he did very solid with his 6th overall and his 4th overall. I think Seider is a little bit of a controversial player. I think he's going to be a very good player for a long time. Lucas Raymond is going to hit around point per game. Will he take that next step to be a superstar? We'll see. But he hit on those top 10 picks. But after that, it was a pretty big whiff. And when looking at rebuilding teams and just young teams that try to contend, having those guys on ELCs and RFA cheap deals, that matters. And when looking at it, he whiffed on his 2nd and 3rd round picks at this point. It looks like none of these guys are going to turn into legit NHLers. During the 2021 shortened season, the Red Wings are actually okay. Well, they're still pretty bad, but they're like not all-time bad when they have 48 points in 56 games, mainly because of their goaltending tandem was amazing that season. Jonathan Bernier had a 914, Thomas Grace had a 912, but when looking at the skaters, Hronik led the team with 26 points, and Larkin only had 23 points in 44 games. However, a big trade goes down during that season. Mantha, who wasn't even playing that good, he only had 21 points in 42 games at the time of the trade, was traded to Washington for Jacob Verana, as well as a 2021 first and a 2022 second. Both of these players kind of flopped in their new home. So when looking at it, the Red Wings got a 1st and a 2nd round pick. So I would definitely say this was good value for Steve Yzerman. Before the 2021 draft, they make some trades. They trade a 2nd round pick for Nick Leddy. I guess you need some veteran defensemen, and thank God because my Islanders needed his contract off the books. And also they go out and get Alex Nedeljkovic, who had a 932 with the Carolina Hurricanes in 23 games during the 2021 season. Looked like potentially the goalie of the future for the Detroit Red Wings. The next season, he would play 52 62 games, he would have a 901, would not live up to expectations. Clearly, it was the Carolina Hurricanes defensive system around him. That deal kind of flopped. But heading into the 2021 draft, they had the 6th overall pick yet again, like in 2019, as well as the 23rd. At 6th overall, they go with another defenseman. Steve Yzerman loves his goddamn defenseman, and Edvinsson was mocked to go around this range. He was a very good prospect, but it was a little bit surprising considering Zadina already kind of looked like a bust at this point. But they go Edvinsson, who's a 6'6" guy with a shit ton of potential. Last 2 seasons, he's been pretty solid in the AHL since coming over. Did not take a significant offensive jump in terms of point production this season, but again, the potential is definitely there. And this season, we should see him in a pretty sizable role, and hopefully he flourishes because he's going to be a massive part of this rebuild. And Steve Yzerman really makes an aggressive move when he trades with the Dallas Stars, trades up to 15th overall, trading the 23rd overall, a 2nd round pick, and a 5th round pick. You're thinking at this point, maybe he's going to go with Jesper Wallstedt, considering he's the consensus best goalie, was like a top 10 prospect falling at that point, or go with a forward, considering the fact that they only really have Lucas Raymond in terms of blue chip forwards. But he goes a little bit off the board. Sebastian Cossa was definitely a very good goalie prospect, but Wallstedt was the consensus #1 guy. But they go with the 6'6" guy, like with Simon Edvinsson, that has a shit ton of potential and was very good in the WHL in his draft year with a 941 in 19 games. It's been kind of hard to read on Cossa as of right now. In terms of 2 years ago, he was so bad in the AHL that they had to send him down to the ECHL. But this season, he had a 913 in the AHL. It looks like he's trending in the right direction. It's just a shame that they ended up trading with the Dallas Stars, who still got Wyatt Johnson at 23rd overall. But this pick, again, the jury is still out. Goalies take a long time. In terms of 2nd and 3rd round picks, he takes Shea Boyum, who is brothers with Zeev, who was very good last year at the college level after being solid the prior 2 years. Denver did win the national title, but he's going to be playing in the AHL this season. He has some upside in terms of an offensive defenseman, as well as also taking Carter Mazer, who had 37 points in 60 games last year at the AHL level, which was pretty impressive. So this draft is a little bit different than the 2019-2021 because none of these guys have played in the NHL in terms of Edvinsson and Cossa, but it's looking like there's definitely more potential in terms of getting more than one roster player from this draft, unlike the 2019 and the 2021. Now it's time for the 2022 season, and of course, this is when Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider debut. Moritz Seider wins the Calder Trophy with 50 points, still his career high in points in a season, as well as Lucas Raymond having 57 points at 20 years old. Yzerman would also make a defenseman trade during the season when he traded Nick Leddy away for Wallman in a 2nd round pick. That was fantastic value, although we're going to talk about a different Wallman in a 2nd round pick later that maybe wasn't as good. But yeah, vibes are absolutely immaculate for Detroit fans, considering the fact that Seider and Raymond look like future top 25, top 20 players in the NHL, on top of them just being the best U22 duo probably in the NHL. In the 2022 draft, he goes back to the SHL yet again when he selected Marco Kasper, who was a bit of a late riser, not a reach by any stretch, but a late riser later in the process. And he was okay for the team in the AHL last season with 35 points in 71 games. I think he's definitely going to be an NHLer, but probably not a top of the lineup guy at this point. They also had 2 second-round picks. First up at 40th overall, Dylan James. He was under half a point per game at the college hockey level this season. Doesn't really look like he's panning out to be anything. But at 52nd overall, I think they might have actually potentially got a sleeper in Dmitry Buchnilikov. When looking at it, he was great in the MHL during his draft year. Not like Kucherov great, but was very good in the MHL. On top of last season, having 29 points in 55 games at the KHL level, and 8 points in 10 games to start this season. This guy is pretty easily the best non-first round pick at this point for Steve Yzerman, considering he's producing at the KHL level. The rest of this draft, it was all nothing burgers for the most part. So after the draft, Steve Yzerman thinks, I have 2 very good players that are going to be very elite in no time. Maybe we're not going to make the playoffs next season, but let's spend some money. We have some money to spend in the 2022 offseason. So he goes out and trades for Ville Husso, who kind of came out of nowhere for the St. Louis Blues, had a 919 during the 2022 season, gives up a 3rd round pick to get him, and then gives him a 3-year deal at $4.75 million. But it turns out that 27-year-old Ville Husso, who came out of nowhere, it was more so an insanity run, considering the fact that in his first year with Detroit, he had an .896 save percentage. Last year, an .892, only played 19 games. This year might not even be in the goalie tandem. He also decided that Moritz Seider needed a left-handed defense partner, and he went out and signed Ben Sherratt, who did play big minutes in Montreal, but wasn't that good in those minutes. And when he got traded to Florida, first up, Florida massively overpaid. He wasn't that good for Florida. They gave him a 4-year, $4.75 million contract. he has not really been worth it, not close to worth it, and him and Sider as a pair was pretty god-awful. The last big deal this offseason was to Andrew Kopp, a 5-year, $5.625 million contract. He was coming off a season in which he had 53 points in 72 games, was really good once he got traded from the Jets to the Rangers, had 18 points in 16 regular season games with the Rangers, 14 and 20 en route to the Eastern Conference Finals. He was kind of expected to be the second-line center until a guy like Marco Kasper was ready to go. That didn't really happen, as in his first season with the Detroit Red Wings, he had 9 goals, 42 points. Then last year, just 33 points in 79 games. And when looking at it, he's 30 years old. They'd be lucky if he returns to like 45 points. So in terms of the 2022 offseason, it's not looking that good, considering the fact that I think Kasper isn't really developing that good. I like that Russian that they took in the second round, but struck out on Husso. Sherrod has been pretty goddamn bad. Andrew Kopp has the best chance to turn it around, but even then, they'd be lucky if he lives up to the contract. You're not going to be getting like serious surplus value. During the 2023 regular season, they're around the 500 team for the most part. They lock up Dylan Larkin on an 8-year deal at $8.7 million, but then they decide to sell so hard at the deadline, which I do agree with. I like that they did this. They traded away Philip Hronek, who had 1 year left and then was a restricted free agent. They got a first and a second round pick on top of Tyler Bertuzzi, who is a pending UFA, and they got a 2024 first-round pick for the Boston Bruins. We're going to get to that pick later as well. So although they are a better team during the 2023 season than the 2022, it's a little bit concerning considering the fact that Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider both kind of have sophomore slumps, down years compared to their rookie seasons, as Raymond has 45 points, Seider goes down to 42. They're still going to be very good players, but maybe not the superstars that we thought after their rookie year. In the 2023 draft, he selects Nate Danielson, 9th overall. And I like Nate Danielson to a degree, but I do think that he's a little bit of a high floor, low ceiling kind of guy. Future best case scenario, like a good 2A second line center. It doesn't really have that ceiling that you're looking for within the top 10, but he kind of makes up for it when he selects Axel Sandin Palika, 17th overall, a guy that was fantastic over in Swedish juniors yet again, going back to Sweden. So I think if you flip the two picks, ASP at 9th overall, Danielson at 17th, it makes more sense in my opinion. It's well worth it. And ASP was very good last year in the SHL. And although he's a defenseman, Yzerman loves his defenseman, as we're seeing. He definitely offers something a little bit different, being like a 5'11", 6-foot, more so offensive, speedy guy. Also in the 2023 draft, he selects Trey Augustine, who was the top U.S. National Team Development Program goaltender. And I like Trey Augustine, but it was definitely pretty interesting considering the fact that just 2 drafts ago, he used the 15th overall selection on Sebastian Cossa. Taking 2 goalies that high within the top 40 in a 3-year stretch was definitely interesting. But I like Trey Augustine. He was very good for Michigan State this year. He had a 9.15. Then he has 2 other second-round picks at 42nd and 47th. Guess what position he selects? He selects 2 goddamn defensemen. He selects Andrew Gibson, who had a solid draft year, +1 in the OHL, but was traded this summer for a 2024 second-round pick, as well as a former 2023 third-round pick. Called that about a wash, as well as taking 6'5" defensive defenseman Brady Cleveland, who had 0 points in 17 games this year for Wisconsin. And again, he's a defensive defenseman, but in order to make it at the NHL level, you got to have some kind of offensive game. So going scoreless at the college level doesn't give me too much faith in him. In the 2023 offseason, he goes aggressive yet again. He tries to yet again get a second-line center, this time in JT Compher, a 5-year deal at $5.1 million. It goes much better. He puts up 48 points in his first season, as well as being very solid defensively. Compher, not a serious second-line center on like an actual contender, an actual high-level playoff team, definitely more so a third-line center, but this was a good deal. However, although that was a good deal, he also brings in Justin Holl on a 3-year deal at $3.4 million. Not as bad as the Ben Sherratt deal, 1 less year, $1.35 million less money, but still didn't really like that much. And then in free agency, he also picks up Alex Lyon, who was great for the Florida Panthers, basically got the Florida Panthers into the playoffs at the end of the 2023 season. For 2 years, $900,000, very good. He probably should be in the tandem next season and was solid for them last year. Then he pulls the trigger on a massive deal when he trades for Alex DeBrincat. He trades Donovan Sabrango, as we talked about before, Dominic Kubalik, who fell off massively in Ottawa and is already in Europe, as well as that Bruins pick from the Tyler Bertuzzi trade for DeBrincat. Now, this deal did kind of fall into his lap to a degree, not to be a hater, but he still executed it. It was still a very good deal when looking at it, but he was a hometown kid and had a shit ton of leverage over the Ottawa Senators. But still, to give up Kubalik when he did, smart. Sabrango is a nothing burger who cared about that first round pick. When looking at it, Detroit had enough prospects, and then he signed him to a 4-year deal at $7.875 million for his age 26 to 29 seasons, basically his prime. And although maybe maybe he's not the 40 and 40 guy that he was when he was playing with Patrick Kane, who was still putting up over 90-point pace, still extremely elite. He is a first liner. He's a 30 and 40 guy, well worth that contract. Also in that offseason, he trades for Jeff Petrie after Petrie gets traded in the Erik Karlsson deal. Petrie kind of stunk it up, but only had like a $2.2 million cap hit. So heading into the season, they have some expectations, and they add expectations when they sign Patrick Kane on a one-year deal at $2.75 million. Objectively, a great deal. I kind of doubted it to a degree because I thought Lucas Raymond would have to move down the lineup. They ended up making it work, but Patrick Kane was great for them. Patrick Kane, even though he was coming off massive hip surgery, had 47 points in 50 games and was actually pretty solid defensively. And the Wings during that season, they were in a playoff position for most of it, but towards the end of the season, Dylan Larkin gets hurt. They go on a 7-game losing streak as soon as he gets hurt, and they're not able to really recover, and as a result, they just barely miss after a controversial Philadelphia Flyers net pull against the Washington Capitals. Raymond really breaks out in this season, of course. I already mentioned it, 31 goals, 41 assists, 72 points. Looks like he's yet again on track to be a star. Yzer, 42 points. His value's not the same as the 2022 season, but he's an established good top pairing defenseman. However, this team was a little bit fugazi. Again, not to be a hater, but I've repeated this so much. When looking at their underlying numbers, when looking at their expected goals percentage, they were kind of a bottom 10 team in the entire NHL. They just shot the shit out of the puck. Looking at guys like Lucas Raymond that shot 19%, Comfer 17.6, Larkin had a career high in shooting percentage. They led the entire league in goals scored above expected. That does matter to a degree. It happened with the Seattle Kraken in 2023. Then they fell off. So although at this point they're a very solid team, I do think that season they kind of did exceed expectations, similar to Washington Capitals. If you replay that season 9 times out of 10, the Wings are probably closer to a mid-80 point team than a 91 point team. They select Michael Brandstad-Nygaard in the draft at 15th overall. I think that was a perfectly solid pick. He was around in that range. Think he's going to be a solid NHLer most likely. They confusingly ship off Jake Wallman before free agency, attaching a second round pick to clear up cap space. And what they do in that offseason in the free agency, they get Cam Talbot, Vladimir Tarasenko, Eric Gustafsson on top of re-signing Patrick Kane. They get a bunch of veterans and say, we're trying to win now. And as a result of this, when it comes to the long-term implications of the Yzerplan, I really don't care how the actual team performs next season in terms of if they stink overall record-wise or if they're really good. Because this roster, it's kind of old. It's kind of old. For me, next season, I really only care about 3 players in terms of the long-term effects of the Yzerplan, and that's Lucas Raymond, proving that last year wasn't some 19% fluke shooting-wise, as well as the team having an elevated shooting percentage. He needs to have a legit 70-ish point season. Yzer needs to take that next step in terms of being a legit number 1 defenseman, especially offensively, on top of Simon Edvinsson actually being an impact second pair guy next season. That's what I care about. I really don't care about this team on the whole because a lot of these guys aren't going to be there in 2 to 3 years. I'd rather have Raymond, Yzer, and Edvinsson all take significant steps, but the Red Wings are like a 79-point team, then say the Detroit Red Wings making the playoffs, but it's off the backs of Patrick Kane having a 6th season, Vladimir Tarasenko turning back the clock, and Cam Talbot playing lights out, if that makes sense. I'd rather have those old guys kind of stink it up and the team stink, and the young guys play great, than the old guys play fantastic, and we have another Yzer 40-point season. Raymond comes down to 62 points, as well as Edvinsson struggling at the NHL level. Like, we know what Larkin is. We know what the Brinket is. They're very good players. They are not the 2 best players on an actual playoff team, legit playoff team, in my opinion. Raymond and Yzer need to keep on developing. That's all I care about heading into next season, as well as their prospect pool. Danielson having a very good season wherever that's at. Trey Augustine being good at the college level. Kosa putting up a 917 in the AHL. This roster isn't the roster that's going to be there in 2 to 3 years. It's going to be massively different. Like, take the defense core and the goaltenders. Outside of Yzer and Edvinsson, they're gone soon. Those guys, every single one is probably going to be replaced. So yeah, the Red Wings are in this really weird spot. I think that they're going to be pretty bad next season, but if their young guys are good, that's kind of a success of a season, in my opinion. This team is still 3 to 4 years away from actually contending at a high level. Getting Patrick Kane, getting Vladimir Tarasenko, getting guys in their 30s that are not part of your long-term plan, it doesn't move me. At the end of the day, the Yzerplan has only provided us 2 legit NHL players. That's literally it. Two guys that have played a full NHL season because that 2017 and 2018 drafts were so bad by Ken Holland. This plan is still pretty raw when looking at it. Like, you look at Tampa Bay, they had their two superstars. And again, they were selected at first and second overall, and Stamkos was a consensus first overall future franchise player. But they had Stamkos, they had Hedman, who quickly, Stamkos, especially second year, I believe he won the Rocket Richard, but Hedman in a couple of years, they had their number one and number two, their franchise center, their franchise defenseman, and we knew it. And then they were just off running. And then Yzerman drafted the pieces around them. I'm still not sure on Lucas Raymond or Moritz Seider being those guys. They don't have to be like that great. Obviously, those are Hall of Fame, legendary top 75 players of all time. But still, the jury is out on those two. Will Sebastian Kosa be Steve Yzerman's Vasilevsky? Will Buchnalikov be his Kucherov, or a lesser version, obviously? Will Mazer be his Braden Point kind of guy that emerges out of nowhere? We don't know yet, but I think we could agree that it's probably trending more so towards no than yes. So in looking at it in the Eastern Conference, yeah, that's why I prefer the New Jersey Devils in terms of their guys that are going to be around for the next 6 to 8 years. The Buffalo Sabres, Rasmus Dahlin, Tage Thompson, and a bunch of young NHL-proven guys. Ottawa Senators have a bunch of U25 talent. The Canadians, bunch of talent, as well as the second best prospect pool in hockey. The Carolina Hurricanes, they're going to be good as long as they have Aho, Svechnikov, and Jarvis. And yeah, those guys I all prefer. And then who knows when the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Florida Panthers are actually going to fall off within the Detroit Red Wings division. I prefer those teams over Detroit just because Detroit still has so much question marks in terms of the Yzerplan. And that's not me saying that the Yzerplan is a failure. We still need to see how these guys develop. And again, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt considering the fact that he came in at an absolutely nuclear rebuild. Dylan Larkin was the only piece of that team worth a shit back in 2019. And he fully nuked it. But at this point, given his trade history, given especially his free agency signing history, there is some cause for concern in considering the fact that the 2019 and 2020 draft, none of the other pieces have really emerged. So as a result, that's where I stand on the Yzerplan. I think they'll eventually probably be a playoff team, but I don't think that they'll ever be a true year in and year out contender in the Eastern Conference. But yeah, let me know in the comments, what do you think about it? Again, I am not saying Detroit is going to be nuking it in 2 to 3 years once they're going to fire Yzerman and then have to hit the complete reset button. They still have a very good prospect pool. They still have the 5th or 6th best prospect pool, I think, in the NHL. Raymond and Seider, at the bare minimum, are going to be good, very good players. Will they be that next level great that's going to be necessary for them to be an actual contender when you look at previous actual consistent contenders? I'm not sure yet. So let me know in the comments, what do you think? I just want to make one full video kind of on the Yzerplan so I can have a definitive, if you want my thoughts, if you think I'm a Wings hater, here's me 15 minutes rambling, giving my full in-depth instead of, oh, this guy's just a Wing hater. But let me know in the comments, what do you think? Do you agree with me? Disagree? Again, the Red Wings, for all we know, it could all work out. It could fail. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? I'll be seeing you in the next one.